"Sir, he lived with me in the orphanage," she said softly, and the billionaire's confident smile vanished. Leaving only shock and memories he had buried for decades, Arjun Mehra was used to commanding attention wherever he went. At every gala, every business meeting, every public appearance, he was the epitome of power and control, a billionaire who had everything the world could offer. But that night, amidst crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors, something unexpected happened. A young woman approached him, her eyes steady, her voice calm but filled with emotion. She reminded him of a past he had long tried to forget, a childhood spent in an orphanage, nights of hunger and fear, laughter shared with friends who had once been his only family. The words she spoke shattered the carefully constructed walls he had built around his life, stirring memories and emotions he thought were long buried. For the first time, Arjun felt vulnerable, unguarded, and utterly human. The grand hall glittered with hundreds of crystal chandeliers, their light reflecting off polished marble floors and casting a golden glow over the elegantly dressed guests. It was the kind of event where every detail screamed wealth and power. Waiters moved swiftly with trays of champagne. Soft music floated through the air, and laughter echoed lightly from groups clustered around the enormous floral arrangements. At the center of it all, standing tall in a sharp-tailored suit, was Arjun Mehra, the billionaire whose name carried weight across industries and whose image was as untouchable as the high walls of his corporate empire. He smiled politely, shook hands, and nodded at people who introduced themselves. But his eyes, though alert, were distant. He was present, yet somehow detached, like a king surveying a world he had built, but no longer truly belonged to. No one in the room knew the story that had shaped the man who now carried the weight of countless businesses on his shoulders. No one knew the nights he had spent shivering in a cramped room in an orphanage, counting the seconds until morning, wishing silently for a family that never came. No one knew about the friends he had made there, children who became siblings, brothers and sisters who shared in the laughter, the fear, and the small joys of an otherwise lonely life. That part of him was hidden, locked away behind the mansion walls, expensive suits, and the glittering public image he had painstakingly built. Ria walked through the crowd, her steps careful but determined. She was not a guest of the event, not someone invited to dine under the chandeliers or mingle with influential people. She was the maid's daughter, a girl who had grown up in the same orphanage as Arjun. Her life had been quiet, modest, and filled with struggles of its own. But tonight she had a reason to be here. She had rehearsed what she would say, how she would introduce herself, yet her heart beat faster with every step closer to him. She knew that one simple sentence could shatter the polished world he had built, world where the memory of the orphanage was carefully tucked away. When she finally stood in front of him, all the rehearsed words seemed to escape her. The golden lights reflected in her eyes, and she took a small, steadying breath. "Sir?" she began softly, her voice trembling just enough to show the weight of her emotions. "He lived with me in the orphanage." Time seemed to slow. Arjun froze. The laughter and music faded into a dull background hum. Every detail in the hall, the chandeliers, the polished marble, the expensive gowns blurred around him. The words hit him with the force of a tidal wave. He went pale, his perfectly composed face draining of color as memories, long buried under years of ambition and success, surged forward, unbidden. The first memory that hit him was of a small, dimly lit room, shared with several children who clung to each other for warmth and comfort. He remembered Ria's younger self, her small hands always helping to distribute whatever little food they had, her bright eyes sparkling even when the world seemed harsh. He remembered the way she laughed when he tried to tell jokes that weren't funny, the way she encouraged him when he felt invisible, the silent comfort of knowing someone understood him without needing words. The orphanage had been a place of survival, but within its walls, these small, fragile connections had made life bearable. He tried to respond politely, his mind racing to reconcile the confident billionaire, standing before everyone else with the frightened boy who had slept on thin blankets, wondering if he would be chosen, if anyone would come for him. But words failed him. All he could do was look at her, pale and slightly shaking, and remember a version of himself he had tried so hard to forget. Ria, on the other hand, seemed to know exactly what she was doing. Her eyes softened as she saw the change in him, the subtle shift in his posture, the faint tremor of unease in his hands. She had expected this reaction. She had known that hearing her words would stir memories he had buried under wealth and success. Yet, she was not there to embarrass him or expose him. She wanted him to remember, to feel, and perhaps to reconnect with the boy he once was. Arjun's mind wandered back to the afternoons, spent in the orphanage courtyard, running and playing until the sun dipped below the horizon, only to return to the harsh reality of empty rooms and the distant, echoing sound of the caretakers' voices. He recalled the nights when hunger gnawed at his stomach, when he whispered secrets to the ceiling, hoping the walls would keep them safe, and he remembered the friendships that had formed in that difficult place, bonds that were fragile yet unbreakable, ties that had carried him through the loneliest days of his life. He noticed the subtle details about Ria that had stayed with him, the warmth in her smile, the honesty in her gaze, and the courage that allowed her to stand there in the glittering hall, speaking the truth of their shared past without fear. It was humbling, almost shocking, to see someone from that distant, forgotten chapter of his life confronting him in the world he had so carefully created. Yet even as the memories surged, Arjun's mind began to strategize, as it always did. He was used to controlling situations, predicting outcomes, and managing perceptions. He thought about the gala, the influential people watching him, the expectations that came with his reputation. But the more he tried to pull himself together, the more he realized that this encounter was beyond any calculated response. This was raw. This was real, and it was unignorable. For a few moments, he could do nothing but stand there, pale and silent, as Ria waited patiently, allowing the weight of her words to settle between them. The noise of the gala, the clinking of glasses, the soft music, the polite chatter resumed slowly. But for Arjun, the world had shifted. He was no longer just a billionaire in a glittering hall. He was a boy again, standing in the orphanage courtyard, hand in hand with a friend who had seen him at his most vulnerable. The moment was a turning point, subtle but undeniable. The polished mask of confidence, the carefully maintained image of power, the distance he had kept from his past toll of it had cracked just slightly, revealing a man who had been shaped not just by his success, but by the struggles, friendships, and memories of a life he had once tried to escape. And in that quiet, suspended moment, Arjun knew that this meeting was not just a coincidence. Ria had come for a reason, and he would soon have to confront the past he had hidden so carefully. But for now, standing in the golden light of the gala, he allowed himself a single, unguarded thought, perhaps the boy he had been. The life he had lived in that orphanage was not something to be forgotten, but something that could finally be acknowledged. After the initial shock of seeing Ria, Arjun found himself unable to shake the memories that her words had awakened. That evening, he returned to the solitude of his massive penthouse, a space filled with sleek furniture, glass walls, and an almost oppressive sense of order. Everything in his life was controlled, calculated, and precise except for the storm raging in his mind. He sank into a leather armchair, staring out at the city lights below, and allowed himself to drift back into the days of his childhood, a time that had been carefully buried under years of ambition and success. He remembered the orphanage in vivid detail. The building was old and slightly worn, with peeling paint and creaking wooden floors that announced each step. The air was often heavy with the smell of cooking and the faint temps of cleaning supplies, a scent that, strangely, he now associated with warmth and safety. There were many children there, all with their own stories, each carrying their pain silently, as if the walls themselves absorbed their sorrows. And in that crowded, noisy environment, friendships had formed that were small but precious, like fragile flowers pushing through cracks in the concrete. Ria had been one of the brightest among them, her laughter a small beacon of hope during long, dreary days. She had a way of noticing things that others overlooked, a shared piece of bread, a scraped knee, a forgotten toy. Even in the simplest acts, she showed kindness that now seemed extraordinary. Arjun remembered the afternoons when they would sit under the big mango tree in the courtyard, sharing stories and making plans for a life they didn't yet understand. He recalled how she had comforted him when he felt invisible, listening to his fears without judgment, offering encouragement with just a smile or a quiet word. One memory stood out above all others. The night when Arjun had been particularly frightened and alone. A thunderstorm had raged outside, rattling the windows, and he had curled up in the corner of the room, hugging his thin blanket for warmth. Rhea had appeared quietly, carrying an extra blanket. She had sat beside him and told him stories until the thunder faded, her presence transforming fear into a strange sense of safety. That night he realized that connection mattered more than comfort, more than food, more than the things the world would later teach him to chase. It was a lesson he had almost forgotten as he sat in his penthouse. Arjun realized that these memories were not just nostalgia, they were keys to understanding himself. The boy who had once been afraid, hungry, and invisible had grown into a man of immense power, but in doing so, he had built walls that kept everyone at a distance. He had chased success relentlessly, using wealth as armor to hide the vulnerability he had never learned to embrace. Yet Rhea's appearance reminded him that his humanity, the essence of who he had been, had never disappeared entirely. It had been waiting, quietly, for a moment like this to surface. Rhea had spoken of the little things that had made life in the orphanage bearable, sharing scraps of food, playing games in the courtyard, whispering secrets at night when the caretakers were distracted. She had reminded him of the quiet acts of courage they had both displayed, like sneaking out to find a stray puppy or helping a younger child who had fallen. These small moments, seemingly insignificant at the time, were the threads that had woven the fabric of his early life. Arjun realized that while he had built a world of glass, steel, and money, it was these threads, these simple human connections, that had truly shaped him. He also remembered the other children, some of whom had been taken by families, while others had vanished into the system, forgotten by the world. The thought of those children, some thriving, others struggling, stirred a mix of guilt and longing within him. He had survived, yes, but he had done so alone, carrying the weight of privilege in the present while remembering the hardships of the past. And now, seeing Rhea, he felt a strange sense of accountability. Perhaps it was not enough to succeed. Perhaps he had a responsibility to honor the boy he once was, by helping those still facing the struggles he had once endured. Rhea's presence also reminded him of the dreams they had shared as children. They had spoken of freedom, of escaping the orphanage one day, and seeing the world beyond its walls. Back then, such dreams had seemed distant, almost impossible, but they had given hope, a reason to smile amid hardship. Now standing in his penthouse, surrounded by luxury and success, Arjun realized that he had achieved more than he could have imagined, but in doing so, he had forgotten to cherish the connections and simple joys that had sustained him as a child. His mind wandered to the afternoon. They had built a small garden in a neglected corner of the orphanage courtyard. With tiny hands, they had planted seeds in the dry soil, laughing when dirt got under their nails or when a bird threatened to steal their effort. That garden had been a symbol of hope, a fragile proof that even in a place of scarcity, life could flourish. Arjun now understood that the resilience they had shown then was the same resilience that had carried him through life's challenges. Even as he tried to ignore the roots of his strength, he remembered Rhea's courage, too. She had often stood up to bullies, defended younger children, and managed to keep spirits high even when resources were low and hope seemed scarce. Her bravery had been quiet, unassuming, yet profoundly impactful. And now, seeing her again, he felt a deep admiration not for her beauty or poise, which were evident, but for the unbroken spirit she carried. She was a living reminder of the strength and integrity they had both developed in the most challenging circumstances. As Arjun reflected on these memories, he began to feel emotions he had long suppressed. Gratitude for the friendships, for the simple joys, for the small acts of kindness. Sadness for the losses and the hardships endured. Regret for the times he had tried to erase that part of himself. And above all, a profound sense of longing to reconnect, to make amends. To honor the boy who had survived against all odds. For the first time in years, Arjun felt a stirring of vulnerability. The polished billionaire persona, always so controlled and intimidating, seemed almost fragile as he sat alone, remembering the orphanage. He realized that Ria had awakened something essential within him, the recognition that wealth and power, while impressive, could not replace human connection, compassion, or the shared experiences that had shaped his character by the time he retired for the night. Arjun knew that he could not ignore Ria's presence or the memories she had brought back. Something had shifted in him, an understanding that the past he had tried to bury was not a burden to avoid, but a foundation to honor. He understood that this reunion was more than a coincidence. It was an opportunity to reconnect with the boy he had been, the friendships that had sustained him, and perhaps even the people who still needed him. And as he drifted into sleep, the faces of those children, the sound of laughter in the courtyard, and Ria's unwavering courage filled his thoughts. He realized that this was only the beginning, an invitation to face his past, embrace his memories, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to heal, reconnect, and give back to the place and people who had quietly shaped his life in ways he had only just begun to understand. The next morning, Arjun woke with a restless mind. The memory of Ria's words from the gala lingered like a shadow, refusing to fade. He had built his life on precision and control, yet nothing in his carefully constructed world had prepared him for the raw, unfiltered truth of the past standing before him. He poured himself a cup of coffee, trying to focus on the familiar routine, the one thing that usually grounded him, but even the bitter warmth failed to soothe the storm inside. Every sip seemed to remind him of nights in the orphanage when warmth and comfort had been scarce, and yet small gestures of kindness had made all the difference. Ria had not just mentioned the orphanage casually. She had brought it back to life. She spoke of the children, the games they played, the meals they shared, and even the pranks that had made the long, lonely days bearable. Her recollections were precise, detailed, and filled with emotion. It was as if she had a map of that time in her mind, a map that led straight to the parts of Arjun he had tried hardest to forget. With every memory she shared, he felt a mixture of nostalgia and unease. It was comforting, yes, but also frightening. He had spent years distancing himself from that life, convincing himself that moving forward meant erasing the past. Now faced with someone who had kept it alive, he felt exposed. He thought of the other children from the orphanage. Some had moved on, some had found families, and some had disappeared into the system, their faces fading from memory. Arjun realized that while he had survived and achieved enormous success, he had done so carrying a secret guilt. Guilt for leaving, for finding opportunities others had not, and for forgetting the small acts of friendship that had once meant everything. Ria's presence stirred that guilt into a heavy, almost physical weight on his chest. He found himself wondering what had become of the friends he had left behind, the ones who had shared his struggles and dreams. When he saw Ria again, outside the gala, at a small cafe tucked away from the city's noise, he felt an unfamiliar mix of tension and curiosity. She had requested this meeting with a calm confidence that unsettled him. There was no pretense in her demeanor, no desire to impress, only the quiet strength of someone who had faced adversity and survived. As he sat across from her, the sounds of clinking cups and distant chatter seemed muted. Ria's eyes were steady, and for the first time, Arjun felt the urge to let his guard down. Though he struggled against it, she began to recount moments from the orphanage that he had almost forgotten. She described how they had huddled together, on cold nights, sharing blankets and whispering stories to distract themselves from hunger. She mentioned the small celebrations they had invented for birthdays, the rituals of helping each other complete chores, and the secret hideouts they had created to escape the harsh rules of the caretakers. Arjun listened intently, realizing that these memories were more than nostalgia. They were pieces of himself that he had neglected, fragments of a humanity he had buried under ambition and wealth. Then Ria said something that made him pale, though he tried not to show it. She mentioned a detail about his adoption, a fact no outsider could have known. It was small, almost incidental, but the knowledge she possessed revealed how deeply she remembered their shared past. For a moment, Arjun's carefully maintained composure wavered. he felt a cold wave of fear mixed with awe. How much did she remember? How much could she reveal if she chose to? The thought of his hidden past being exposed, not to the world, but even to someone who had been a part of it, unsettled him. Despite the tension, Rhea did not accuse or confront him aggressively. Her voice remained calm, tinged with empathy. She explained that she had been keeping track of him not out of malice, but out of a desire to reconnect and perhaps guide him toward remembering the boy he once was. She spoke of how she admired his success, yet she wanted him to acknowledge that it was the boy from the orphanage, the one who had endured hardship, who had shared laughter and pain with friends, that had shaped the man he had become. Her words pierced him more deeply than any criticism ever could. Arjun struggled to respond. His mind raced, trying to balance his present identity with the vulnerable boy of his past. The polished, confident persona he presented to the world felt fragile when compared to the raw, unfiltered truth Rhea represented. He wanted to deny, deflect, or change the subject, yet every instinct screamed that he could not. This was not a conversation he could control. This was a reckoning with his own history, with memories he had worked so hard to lock away. He remembered the games they had played, the quiet moments of shared joy, and even the small arguments that had always ended with forgiveness. Each recollection reminded him of the deep human connections he had taken for granted in his pursuit of success. He realized that in trying to build an empire, he had inadvertently built walls around himself, isolating the part of his heart that had learned empathy, kindness, and resilience through the struggles of childhood. Rhea was a mirror reflecting not just his past, but the man he had hidden from himself. There was a moment of silence between them, heavy with unspoken words. Arjun's heart raced, not with fear of danger, but with the intensity of emotions he had long suppressed: regret, longing, and a profound vulnerability. Rhea's calm gaze seemed to challenge him gently, asking silently if he could finally face what he had avoided for so long. He realized that this was not just about memories. It was about truth. She knew him, truly knew him, in a way no one else ever had. He thought about the lessons of the orphanage, lessons about resilience, courage, and the importance of small acts of kindness. He realized that Rhea had kept those lessons alive, and in doing so, had reminded him that his humanity was not lost. He could choose to reconnect with it, to embrace the boy he had been, and perhaps use the power and wealth he had gained to honor that past. Or he could continue to hide, maintaining the illusion of control while ignoring the part of himself that had been forged in adversity. Rhea's presence became a catalyst for reflection. She did not demand anything from him, but merely reminded him of who he truly was, who he had been, and who he could still be. The vulnerability she evoked was uncomfortable, yet necessary. Arjun realized that he had spent years constructing a life that was admired by many, but understood by few. For the first time, he was faced with someone who understood the foundation upon which that life was built. He felt a deep, gnawing need to confront the past, not just in memory, but in reality. He wanted to know what had become of the friends he had grown up with, to see if the bonds forged in hardship could still hold meaning in the present. He wanted to face the truths he had avoided, to reconcile his past with his present, and perhaps to make amends in ways that were long overdue. Rhea, sensing his inner turmoil, offered no judgment, only patience. She spoke gently, encouraging him to remember, to feel, and to accept. Her presence was both comforting and challenging, a delicate balance that pushed him toward introspection. Arjun understood that she was not just a reminder of the past, she was a guide toward understanding and embracing it. By the end of their meeting, Arjun felt the weight of realization settle upon him. The memories of the orphanage, once distant and hazy, had been brought vividly to life. The guilt, the longing, the bonds of friendship, and the lessons of resilience had all resurfaced. He knew that moving forward would require more than business decisions and strategic planning. It would require confronting his own history, acknowledging the boy he had once been, and embracing the truths that Rhea had gently reminded him of. As he left the cafe, Arjun felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. The past was no longer something he could ignore. It was alive, tangible, and waiting for him to face it. And somewhere deep inside, he understood that the journey ahead would change him not just as a businessman or a public figure, but as a human being who had once lived, laughed, and survived in the orphanage alongside someone who had never forgotten him. Arjun's thoughts had been restless ever since the cafe meeting with Ria. Her words and memories of the orphanage had stirred something inside him that he could no longer ignore. That evening, he requested that she meet him at his private study, a quiet, dimly lit room filled with books, wards, and windows overlooking the city. The room was meticulously organized, reflecting the man he had become: controlled, composed, precise. But tonight, that control would be tested. When Ria entered, she was calm yet confident, carrying herself with a poise that suggested she knew exactly why she was there and what needed to be done. Arjun gestured for her to sit, his usual eloquence failing him slightly as he struggled to reconcile the poised young woman before him with the girl who had shared his hardships years ago. He felt an unexpected mixture of admiration and unease. Ria, sensing his tension, allowed a small, understanding smile to form, but she did not speak immediately. She waited, letting him find the words, letting him confront the emotions that had been buried for decades. Finally, Arjun broke the silence. "Why are you here, Ria? After all these years, why now?" His voice was calm on the surface, but inside it betrayed the whirlwind of feelings he could not yet name: guilt, curiosity, fear, and something like hope. He wanted to understand her motives, to gauge whether she had come seeking confrontation, closure, or perhaps something else entirely. Ria's eyes softened, and she leaned slightly forward. "I'm here because I never forgot you or the times we shared," she said quietly. "Because even though life took us in different directions, I always remembered the boy who had so much courage, even when he didn't know it. I wanted to remind you that you were never alone, and that those memories, that part of yourself, still matters." Her words hit him harder than he expected. They were gentle, almost tender, yet they carried a weight that forced him to confront emotions he had carefully hidden. He thought of the nights in the orphanage when he had felt invisible, when fear had clouded his young mind, and when Ria's simple acts of kindness had been the only light in the darkness. All those moments came rushing back, unfiltered and raw. Ria continued, recounting stories from their shared pasts, intimate memories that made the walls Arjun had built around his heart feel fragile. She spoke of how they had comforted each other during harsh nights, how they had celebrated small victories, and how they had leaned on one another when life felt unfair. Her voice was steady, but the emotion in it was unmistakable. As she spoke, Arjun felt the mask of the billionaire slip, revealing the boy he had once been: vulnerable, human, and deeply emotional. Then she said something that made him pause entirely. "I know about your adoption, Arjun," she said softly, almost as if afraid to speak it aloud. "I know the details no one else knows, and I understand why you've kept it a secret. But I also think it's time you faced it, not with shame, but with acceptance." Arjun's face drained of color. The past he had buried so meticulously now stood before him, illuminated by her calm, unwavering gaze. His first instinct was to deflect, to deny, to change the subject. But deep down, he knew he could not. Ria knew him, truly knew him, in a way that no one else ever had. The boy he had been, the experiences he had survived, and the feelings he had long suppressed, they were all laid bare. He leaned back in his chair, struggling to steady his voice. I never wanted to be defined by that part of my life," he admitted. "I worked so hard to escape it, to become someone else, someone stronger. I wanted to forget the fear, the loneliness, everything. And yet, here you are, reminding me of all of it." Ria reached out, gently placing her hand on the table, her gesture simple but comforting. "I'm not here to remind you to feel ashamed, Arjun. I'm here to remind you that those experiences shaped you, yes, but they also gave you strength, courage, and compassion. You survived because of who you were, and you became who you are because of it. That's not something to hide. It's something to honor." Her words penetrated him deeper than he could have imagined. He realized that he had been running from himself for years, hiding behind wealth, influence, and carefully curated appearances. All the achievements in the world could not replace the connections, the lessons, and the humanity he had once known. Rhea had held on to that truth, and now it was confronting him with quiet insistence. For a moment, the room fell into a silence so complete that it felt almost sacred. Arjun could hear the faint hum of the city below, the distant traffic, and the soft creak of the chair as he shifted slightly. But inside, the silence was alive with the emotions he had long denied regret. Longing, gratitude, and a deep, unspoken sorrow for the parts of himself he had neglected. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've always felt guilty," he confessed. "Guilty for surviving when so many others didn't. Guilty for leaving the orphanage, for leaving friends behind. And I've carried that guilt quietly, believing that success could erase it. But it hasn't. It never will." Rhea nodded gently. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore," she said. "You have the chance to make things right, not just for yourself, but for the children who still need someone to care. You have the chance to be the person you always could have been. Someone who acknowledges the past and uses it to bring hope to others." Her words sparked something deep within him, a desire he had not felt in years. He wanted to reconnect, to reconcile, to honor the boy he had been and the friendships that had sustained him. He wanted to face the truths he had long avoided and find a way to make a difference. And yet he was also afraid of vulnerability, of exposure, and of confronting the emotions he had buried so carefully. The conversation continued for hours, a delicate dance of confession and understanding. Rhea shared more stories, each one peeling away another layer of Arjun's defenses, and each one forcing him to reflect on who he had become and who he still wanted to be. He spoke of his fears, his regrets, and the loneliness that had accompanied his rise to success. He admitted that while he had achieved everything he had ever dreamed of materially, the emptiness remained a gap that only acknowledging his past could fill. By the end of the night, something had shifted. The tension between them had transformed from unease to a shared understanding. A silent agreement that the past, while painful, was not something to fear. It was a foundation, a reminder of resilience, courage, and humanity. Rhea had guided him to see that embracing his past did not diminish his success. It enriched it. Arjun realized that the confrontation he had feared was not a threat. It was an opportunity. An opportunity to heal, to reconnect, and to act. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of clarity and purpose that went beyond wealth or reputation. He understood that the boy he had once been, the orphanage that had shaped him, and the friends who had shared in his struggles were not burdens, they were treasures. And it was time to honor them, openly and sincerely. As Rhea left the study that night, Arjun remained seated, reflecting on the profound transformation that had taken place. He understood that the journey ahead would not be easy, that facing his past and reconnecting with those he had left behind would require courage and honesty. But for the first time, he felt ready. He felt a deep, undeniable pull to act not as a businessman or a public figure, but as the boy who had survived, the man who had learned, and the person who was finally willing to embrace the truth of who he was. The days following Arjun's confrontation with Rhea were filled with a restless energy he had never experienced before. The conversations, memories, and confessions had stirred something inside him that refused to be ignored. The polished, distant billionaire image he had maintained for years no longer felt complete. He realized that success, wealth, and power meant little if he continued to ignore the boy he had once been, the orphanage that had shaped him, and the people who had once shared in his struggles. For the first time, he understood that real fulfillment came from connection, compassion, and giving back. Arjun decided to act. His first step was to visit the orphanage, a place he had avoided for years out of guilt and fear. Driving through the streets of the city, he felt a strange mixture of anticipation, anxiety, and nostalgia. As he approached the old building, memories came flooding back, the squeaking floors, the smell of food cooking in the tiny kitchen, the laughter of children echoing through the courtyard. He remembered his own footsteps running through the halls, chasing small joys amid the harsh realities of life. The orphanage looked the same in some ways, worn and weathered. Yet alive with the energy of children playing and learning, Ria was there to meet him, standing near the entrance with a warm smile that made him feel unexpectedly at ease. She had been helping manage the orphanage's daily activities and had remained a constant presence in its life. Seeing her, Arjun felt a surge of gratitude and relief. She had guided him gently, allowing him to face the past without judgment. Her courage and patience reminded him of why he had connected with her as a child, and why he had respected her spirit ever since. Stepping inside, Arjun felt a wave of emotion. The children ran past him, some curious, some shy, their laughter filling the air with life. He noticed how they looked at him, a mix of curiosity and wonder, and he realized that in their eyes he could see a reflection of the boy he once was. Memories of his own childhood, of feeling invisible, longing for attention, of small victories that brought hope flooded back. He understood that these children, just like him once, needed guidance, care, and reassurance that the world could be kinder than it seemed. He walked with Ria through the orphanage, observing the classrooms, the courtyard, and the small garden where children played and learned together. Each corner carried memories. Each sound echoed the past. Ria introduced him to the staff and children, explaining his background in gentle terms without making him uncomfortable. Arjun watched as the children's faces lit up, inspired by the presence of someone who had once walked the same path as they did. He felt a deep sense of responsibility stir within him, not just to the orphanage, but to the children who represented hope, resilience, potential. Sitting down with Ria later, Arjun shared his plans. He wanted to invest in the orphanage, improve its facilities, provide better education, create opportunities for children who otherwise might never have them. But more than material support, he wanted to be present, to mentor, and to reconnect with the emotional part of himself that had grown in that very place. Ria listened, her eyes shining with pride and understanding. She reminded him that his actions would not just change the orphanage, but could inspire the children to dream bigger, to believe in themselves, and to understand that their past did not define their future. Over the following weeks, Arjun immersed himself in the work. He met with educators, organized programs, and even spent time teaching life skills to the children. He rediscovered the joy of small victories, seeing a shy child read their first sentence, watching children collaborate on a project, and witnessing the growth of confidence in those who had once been afraid to speak. Each day reminded him of the resilience and courage he had learned as a child, and each smile, each word of gratitude, brought him closer to healing the emotional wounds he had carried for years. Ria was always by his side, guiding him through the challenges, providing insight, and ensuring that his involvement remained meaningful rather than performative. Together, they organized events, celebrated milestones, and created new traditions for the children. Arjun noticed how natural it felt to work with her, how her presence brought out a side of him that he had thought long buried: compassionate, patient, and deeply connected to others. The bond between them, forged in childhood and rekindled in adulthood, grew stronger with every shared experience. One afternoon, as the sun cast golden light across the courtyard, Arjun watched the children play and felt a deep sense of peace. He realized that he had come full circle from a boy who had once dreamed of freedom, and belonging to a man who now had the power to provide it for others. The weight of guilt and fear that had burdened him for years seemed lighter, placed by a sense of purpose and fulfillment he had never experienced before. He understood that his success was no longer just about wealth or recognition. It was about impact, legacy, and the ability to give back in the quiet moments. He reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the boy who had huddled under blankets during thunderstorms, the small victories that had kept him going, and the friendships that had sustained him through loneliness and fear. He thought of Ria, whose courage and wisdom had guided him gently, reminding him of his true self. He realized that acknowledging his past did not make him weak, it made him whole. Arjun also began to reconnect with other people from the orphanage, seeking out friends he had lost touch with. Some had struggled, some had succeeded, but all shared a common bond: the experience of growing up in the orphanage and learning to survive. Reconnecting with them brought him unexpected joy, laughter, and even moments of reflection on the mistakes and choices he had made along the way. He realized that these relationships, once taken for granted, were treasures to be cherished, not forgotten. The children at the orphanage began to look at Arjun as more than just a benefactor. They saw him as a mentor, a role model, and someone who had walked the path they were on. They listened to his stories, not just of wealth or success, but of resilience, hope, and courage. He shared with them the lessons he had learned, that adversity could be overcome, that small acts of kindness mattered, and that the bonds of friendship and empathy were more valuable than any material possession. His presence became a source of inspiration, a living testament to the power of perseverance and heart. Riya and Arjun's bond deepened as they worked together. They laughed, shared memories, and supported each other through challenges. The past that had once been a source of pain became a foundation for trust, understanding, and mutual respect. Arjun realized that her guidance and presence had helped him reconnect with a part of himself he had long forgotten, the part that was compassionate, vulnerable, and capable of love. In time, the orphanage transformed it, just in appearance, but in spirit. The children thrived, the staff felt supported, and a culture of hope and possibility took root. Arjun's involvement became more than philanthropy. It became a mission, a way to honor the boy he had once been, and the people who had shaped his life. Each day he felt more grounded, more complete, and more connected to the humanity that wealth alone could never provide. One evening, as he and Riya walked through the courtyard, watching the children play under the setting sun, Arjun felt a profound sense of peace. He realized that he had finally reconciled with his past, embraced his present, and created a future filled with purpose and connection. The boy who had once lived in fear and loneliness had grown into a man who understood the value of empathy, courage, and love. And the journey, which had begun with a single meeting, had brought him home, not to a place, but to himself. Arjun knew that his story, while shaped by wealth and success, was ultimately defined by the human connections that had endured through time. The orphanage, Riya, and the children he now supported reminded him that true fulfillment came from understanding, compassion, and giving back. In helping them, he had healed himself. In reconnecting with the past, he had found the courage to embrace life fully. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the courtyard, he walked beside Riya, hand in hand, knowing that he was finally at peace with who he was, where he came from, and the legacy he would leave behind.